Hi class, welcome back. This is Joseph Komrowski, your professor. Today we're still in chapter 1, section 1.2, recognizing arguments. So in this section, you're going to recognize an argument from a non-argument. And when you see a non-argument, you're going to realize there's no inferential chain of reasoning. And then there's at least 6 or 7 types of non-argument forms, and you're going to have to recognize them. So once again, you got to recognize argument from a non-argument. So one thing I wanted to point out is if you're taking my class, whether you're at Cal State San Marcos or Mount San Antonio College, in this section, you'll have my video that I'll link from YouTube into your assignment, or you also have these. So in chapter 1 on MindTap, you also have the chapter 1 videos. So you have all of those, and you can link, for example, when we get to 1.4, you can listen to my video and then both of these. And I think a lot of these are done by the author of the book, Hurley himself. So they're really good. So you have those. So that's pretty much it. Now let me get to the lesson. Okay, so 1.2, recognize arguments. So I'll just read you a little bit. Not all passages contain arguments. Because logic deals with arguments, it is important to be able to distinguish passages that contain arguments from those who do not. In general, these passages contain argument if it purports to prove something. If it does not do so, then it's not an argument, basically. So you have to be making a claim that you're trying to prove something. Even if you're not proving it, you're still trying to prove it. For example, we come across arguments that are just horrible. For example, remember that one that I did in the video, all dragons fly, premise 1, premise 2, Joseph is a dragon, conclusion, therefore Joseph can fly. It is an argument because it's trying to prove something. It's trying to prove that I can fly, but it's a horrible argument. Nevertheless, it's still an argument because it's trying to prove something. So it doesn't matter if it actually proves it or not, if it's trying to make it prove something or show that a claim is true. That's all that's needed to have the form of an argument. So let's do this. So yeah, the definition of an argument expresses what is needed for a passage to contain. So 2 things. At least one of the statements must claim to present evidence or reasons. Is that a conclusion or a premise? Those are premise. If something presents evidence or reasons to believe or facts, that's all premises. Those are used to support a conclusion. And then number 2, there must be a claim that the alleged evidence supports or implies something. That is, a claim that something follows from your alleged evidence or reasons. And this is a little bit of review. If your reasons or evidence are good, your conclusion should follow if it has the right form. And we'll see more about that later. But so these 2 are necessary. You got to have some sort of evidence or reasons to believe or facts, which are your premises. And those are going to try to or purport to prove something or show that a conclusion follows. So, yeah, and then right down here, he emphasizes what I already said. It's not necessary that the premises present actual evidence or true reasons, nor that the premise actually support the conclusion. But at least the premises must claim to present evidence or reasons, and there must be a claim that the evidence or reasons support or imply something. So this is just a huge repeat of what was just said. Okay, so let's just get down to it. Let's just take a moment of silence to acknowledge Aristotle. All right, there you go. He's the father of logic. I mean, that's just enough said. Awesome. He weighed into many parts of this book, actually, over 2,000 years ago. That's why he's awesome. Also, he did the first systematic treatment of ethics. We call it now virtue ethics. Back then, he didn't call it virtue ethics. It's just what the Greeks did, but he systematized it. And so that's another reason he's super awesome. I mean, he's got a massive, he just had his hands in everything. Epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, logic, aesthetics, politics. But yeah, massive contribution in logic. So you can read that on your own if you want. But he created syllogisms. We'll see about these in these later sections in chapter 1. Awesome. I actually use syllogisms in any logic paper I write, or sorry, any philosophy paper that I write. I use his syllogisms because they're simple, and we'll see later what those are like. But yes, so let's just read on. In deciding whether a passage contains an argument, the claim that the alleged reasons or evidence supports or implies something is usually the more important of the two. Such a claim can either be explicit or implicit. Now, I've already went over some of this. An explicit claim is usually asserted by a premise or conclusion indicating words, thus, since, because, hence, therefore. We have premise indicating words and we have conclusion indicating words. Premise indicating is, because, since, whatever. Hence, therefore, and thus, those are conclusion indicating words. Usually, if you see one or more of these, usually you're dealing with an argument. As we'll see later on, there's an exception to that, but usually. And what that means is if you have these, and I call these trigger words, they're explicit. Meaning if you have a trigger word showing up, or two, usually you have an explicit claim, and that's just saying, hey, I'm loud and clear telling you, hey, flashing red lights, this is an argument, because you have trigger words. However, if you don't have trigger words, it could still be an argument. They just don't have the flashing red lights telling you, hey. And think of it like, how planes land on a runway, and you have somebody at the bottom sometimes holding lights, like flashing red lights, and they're pulling, or they're basically saying, hey, plane, here I am, here's the runway, come in and land here. Those flashing red lights, those are like the explicit trigger words, okay? But even if you didn't have flashing red lights, the pilot would still know, oh, there's a runway. I still know that there's, an airfield to land on. Similarly, the critical thinker or the rational thinker like me and you, we still know that there's an argument. We just don't have the trigger words. Okay. So here's an example. The Ebola virus has yet to be eradicated, and it kills on average 50% of those it infects. Thus, Ebola remains a threat to human health. Thus, that's a trigger word. Is that a premise trigger word or a conclusion trigger word? Conclusion trigger word. So, and again, this should be a review, but at this point, I'm going to go to sorry, my computer's slow. You should have the handout right here. And this handout should be inside your website. And if you're just wanting to learn about logic or critical thinking and you're looking at my YouTube video, that's fine. You still can look at this handout now. But again, this is review, and this is an excellent handout for all of Chapter 1. So you might say, where are they at? Oh, you know what? We'll come to that handout later. I'll go back. It's really what I want to do is show you back in section 1.1. Premise indicating words, conclusion indicating words. There's a huge list right there. So this is just review. 1.2 is already reviewing what you would have learned in 1.1. So again, know these words: conclusion indicating, premise indicating. So you're not going to see a premise indicating word inside of a conclusion. You're just not going to see it that way. So let's just go back to 1.2. Yeah, and that's just to show that this section right here is just a review of the huge example that you already had in 1.1. An implicit claim exists if there's an inferential relationship between the statements in a passage, but the statement contains no indicating words. Again, this is review. Inferential relationship, that means that there's a chain of reasoning that flows from the premise. Maybe if you have 2 premise or 3 premise or 4 premise, as you're reading the premises or premise, they'll flow right into the conclusion. That's what inferential relationship means. It means your reasoning process proceeds from one to the next in a smooth manner, you might say. What does it mean by implicit? Well, it just means there's no trigger words. So there's no thus, therefore, since, because, but it's still an argument. The genetic modifications of food is risky business. Now, is that the conclusion or the premises? Yeah, this is the conclusion, right? The premises right here, genetic engineering can introduce unintended changes into DNA of the food and producing organism. That would be one premise, and then and separates it from another premise. These changes can be toxic to the consumer. So if you have both premises, they kind of lead into the conclusion. Now you might say this is backwards in one sense. Why do you have the conclusion first? Why not the premises? Well, you'll see a lot of times in literature and magazines and sometimes even podcasts, the author will have the conclusion first in the paragraph so it stands out at you. This is the bottom line. And think of that. The conclusion is like a bottom line. And then he supports it with the premises. Usually, you'll see later on in this chapter, you'll see premises first, then the conclusion last. It'll be like premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, conclusion, right? It can go either way. But a lot of times when you see prose, and what that just means is paragraph form, you're not going to have numbers standing out at you like premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. It'll just be prose. It'll be a paragraph. A lot of the times the conclusion either shows up in the first paragraph or the first statement of the paragraph or the last, or the first sentence of the paragraph or the last sentence. This just happens to shows up in the first. Okay. And you can read this. Right now he's making a temporal versus a logical distinction. Temporal just means there's a time stamp on it. I'll let you read that. So now, let me just cut to the chase. So when you're thinking about your homework or these different examples, they will all be right here. And then I'll unpack each one just a little bit. Right here. So right before your homework, these are all the non-inferential, or these are all the non-arguments. There's warnings, pieces of advice, statements of belief, statements of opinions, loosely associated statements, reports, on and on. Those are all non-arguments. And then there's the argument, right? Your homework's going to be saying, hey, do you know how to recognize all these non-argument forms? That's the bottom line of your homework, okay? So now we'll go up. Some are very easy, some not so easy. A warning, very easy. So let me just read you before we start in, though. Simple non-inferential passages are unproblematic passages that claim that anything is being proved, or they lack a claim. They're not really trying to prove anything. They're not really using evidence or reasons to believe or facts, to try to force a conclusion on you or prove a conclusion. It's not what's going on. So let me just give you an example. A warning is a form of expression that is intended to put someone on guard against a dangerous or detrimental situation. Like if something's bad, let's use Trump language. That's bad, or that's really, really bad. Like real simple 5th grade language, right? That's a warning. Watch out there that you don't slip on the ice. Or whatever you do, never confide personal secrets to blabbermouth Bob. That's just saying, hey man, if somebody's a gossiper and you think that they can keep a secret, chances are, if you know their history, they can't. These are just warnings. They're not arguments, okay? Pieces of advice. Read this one. And again, the beautiful thing about this video, even though they're about 30 to 40 minutes, if you get, if you find yourself spacing out or you're confused, just stop the video. Do the Hurley reading, come back to the video, or break this video up into multiple parts. Then you can listen to it over and over, okay? You don't have to listen to these videos in one setting. Or if you're driving, or if you're like, I don't know, if you're vegging out and doing something and you have this video in the background and you hear it like a couple times, it could really help you. But there's multiple ways of, dealing with my videos in the best way possible, for you to be able to understand what Hurley's telling you and what I'm trying to unpack. And then secondly, to be able to do your homework. So a piece of advice is a form of expression that makes a recommendation about some future decision or course of conduct. Okay. So I would suggest, I'm going to go straight down to this bottom one. That is like a really awesome trigger word for, hey, they're giving you a piece of advice, or you should keep a few things in mind. Might be another trigger word phrase, or a phrase that has a bunch of trigger words. Okay. You should keep in mind a few things, or keep a few things in mind before buying a used car, blah, 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 blah. They're just giving you advice. I would suggest, so again, I think piece of advice and warning, they're pretty easy. Statement of belief or opinion is an expression about what someone happens to believe or think about something. It might not be that they're even true, they just believe it. And again, I've said this before, you can have beliefs about reality. They might be false. Remember when you were 2 or 3 years old and you believed in the Santa Claus? I mean, you literally did, right? I did. I know I did, right? And even the Tooth Fairy. Those were beliefs. They were things that I were ready to act on in reality as if they were true, right? That's what a belief is. It's like a mental state. You really get into this deeper if you take my philosophy class. We talk about philosophy of mind, like mental beliefs. But anyways, a belief that we had about the Tooth Fairy or the Santa Claus, they were actually false beliefs. They weren't true, but we still believed them. So we believe, I mean, that's an awesome trigger, trigger words. And then this one right here. Well, let's just start with the first one. We believe that our company must develop, produce outstanding products that will perform, blah, blah, blah. And then also, we believe, and it says it again. I mean, that's literally statement of belief. They're using the words we believe or opinion. Again, you could have an opinion about something. That doesn't mean that you have an argument. An opinion would be like this. Hey, Game of Thrones is the best movie series ever, dude. Is that an argument or an opinion? It's an opinion. An argument is when I give you reasons to believe. Hey, Game of Thrones is the best TV show series ever. Here's why. They have really in-depth plots. Their actors have won many awards. They're very high quality, being filmed in HBO. They're not like, side B movies. So what I've just done is given you 3 pieces of evidence or reasons to believe for the opinion. Game of Thrones is the best series ever. Therefore, it's not just an opinion now, it's a conclusion. So the difference between an opinion and an argument is that an opinion gives you facts, evidence, or reasons to believe. An opinion doesn't do that. It just flat out says, hey, Spider-Man's the best movie, dude. So we can just blurt out opinions all day long. Hey, I like this type of mascara. If you're a woman or whoever, you put mascara on. Or, hey, German Shepherds are the best dogs. These are all opinions. Okay. So statement of belief or opinion, and you can read this second example for the opinion, okay? Loosely associated statements may be about some general subject, but they lack a claim that one of them is proved by the others. So let me read this to you. Not to honor men of worth will keep the people from contention. Not to value goods that are hard to come by will keep them from theft. Not to display what is desirable will keep them from being unsettled of mind. So you might say this is really good wisdom, but it's kind of scattered. They're loosely associated statements about some general wisdom, but there's not really premises, evidence, or conclusion supporting a very specific conclusion. So you might say, yeah, they're related, these series of passages, but it's not a conclusion. They're not premises supporting one, so it's not an argument altogether. And again, what are we trying to do in this section 1.2? We're trying to recognize non-arguments by their forms. One type of non-argument is this, loosely associated statements. Another one is a belief or opinion. Another one's a piece of advice. Another one's a warning. We're trying to differentiate between these, okay? A report. This is pretty easy. A report consists of a group of statements that convey information about some topic or event. Usually, too, a report could be in a newspaper, a journal, even a podcast. A lot of us these days, we're not reading newspapers anymore. Some of us aren't even reading magazines anymore. We're all about the podcast or the YouTube, like the Joe Rogan interviewing stuff like that, interviewing people. And what's he doing when he interviews people, or what are the podcast people doing? They're trying to present to you information when they interview somebody, or they've read reports themselves and they're trying to give you just the information. That's all they're doing, giving you information, but they're not necessarily giving you an argument. They might be. But like a journal's job, let's say there's a fire out in Temecula where I live, and a reporter comes up, or journalist, and they say, oh, the fire started at 8 o'clock in the morning, blah, 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 blah. And they're just giving you facts, right? They're just giving you a report. So you can read this example. Group of statements convey information about some topic or event. For example, if there's a fire in Temecula, the topic or the event, look, a fire happened. And going back to that, like 8 o'clock, there was a fire. There was strong winds, Santa Ana winds. 4 people were injured, but nobody was killed. See how I'm lopping on information? I'm just giving you more and more information. It's not necessarily that I'm giving you an argument. Okay, so you can see he's just giving you examples. Newspaper clipping, world politics. Just finding the source could actually trigger you like, hey, I think this is a report. Why? Because it's coming from, some big time news deal. Expository passages. Let me give you this one. I'm just highlighting kind of the bottom line if you're doing your reading. Expository passage is a kind of discourse that begins with a topic sentence, followed by one or more sentences that develop the topic sentence. If the objective is not to prove the topic sentence, but only to expand it or elaborate, then there's no argument. So here's an example. There are 3 familiar states of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. So each sentence that precedes this, first one, so the main topic is, we're talking about matter, right? And they're solid, liquid, gas. Each sentence is going to unpack what a solid is, what a liquid is, what a gas is, but there's no argument. It's just expanding on the general topic of matter. Solid objects ordinarily maintain their shape and volume regardless of their location. A liquid occupies, just giving you information, expanding upon matter. If I was to give you one on chess, the topic of chess, and if you didn't know this, I super love chess. I used to play in chess tournaments. Total nerd, right? I studied chess theory. But let me give you an example of an expository passage relating to chess. Chess is a game that uses white pieces and black pieces. Doesn't even have to be white. They could be light pieces or dark pieces, right? Because they're light squares and dark squares. There happen to be 64 squares on the board. There are tactics associated with chess. There's an opening part of the game, which we call the beginning game, a middle game where a lot of the tactics are used to try to take out a king, and then there's the end game when less pieces are left. All I've just done right now is expanded upon the topic of chess. I didn't give you an argument. Chess is good or bad, or I'm just giving you information about it. Just like Hurley did with matter. And I could go on and on and on about chess for hours, but we're not here for that. So it's an example of an expository passage. Again, topic sentence, and one or more sentences developing the topic, okay? So like he just did with matter, I just did the same thing with chess. If you didn't know what chess was like, well, there's a board, 64 squares. You could have light pieces, dark pieces. You can even have pawns, bishops, knights, rooks, queen, king. So all I've done is expanded upon that first topic sentence, and that's expository. Illustration. Illustration is tricky because it could contain the word thus, right? And if you go back to earlier section 1.1, thus is a conclusion indicating word. So you might see in your homework the word thus and go, oh, it's an argument, right? Because remember, in your homework, You're not just going to have non-argument forms. You're actually going to have arguments in there. And if you see the word thus and you think, oh, it's an argument, I'm done. But it could be an illustration. Okay, so that's the trick. Give me a second. Okay, so an illustration is an expression involving one or more examples that are intended to show what something means or how it is done. Illustrations are often confused with arguments because the illustration contains indicator words such as thus. And I already went over that right now. So here's an example. Chemical elements, as well as compounds, can be represented by molecular formulas. Thus, oxygen is represented by O2, water by H2O, and sodium chloride by NaCl. So this is not an argument. This is just giving you an example of what chemical elements mean or how something's done. So here's another one. This is hard to pronounce for me. I don't know why. Deciduous tree is any tree that loses its leaves during the winter. For example, maples are deciduous, and so are elms, poplars, hawthorns, and alders. These are examples of illustrations. Like, what does it mean for this kind of tree to lose its leaves? Well, he's going to give you an example. Or what kind of trees do that? I'll illustrate. Maples do it. Elms do it. Poplars do it. Poplars. Alders. So, yeah. And then he says arguments from examples. So he'll give you an example of these. But again, you can look at Hurley's examples of illustrations. They're not arguments. They're illustrations. Explanation. So one of the most important kinds of non-arguments is an explanation. An explanation is an expression that purports to shed light on some event or phenomena. The event or phenomena in question is usually an accepted matter of fact. So, for example, the sky appears blue from the Earth's surface because light rays from the sun are scattered by particles in the atmosphere. The sky appears blue. That's a matter of fact, right? And then they're going to explain it. But why does it appear blue? Well, because, and on and on. And because, again, this is a premise indicating word, so you might think it's an argument. No. It's a explanation. Takes a matter of fact, sheds light on it. Golf balls have dimpled surfaces, right? That's just a fact. We can look at it, we can see it. Because, and then there's an explanation of why this is the case, right? So I would say that word because, if you see these, could be an argument, could be an explanation. Find out what's going on. If it's just a matter of fact and they're explaining it, that's an explanation. It's not an argument, okay? And this is just like definendum, definens. Explanendum is the statement that describes the event or phenomena. Exponens is the statement or group of statements that purports to do the explaining. So here we go. This chart differentiates between the argument and the explanation, or the explanations, which are non-arguments. So accepted fact, like the sky is blue. Exponens, the shedding light on that. And then versus conclusion, which is supported by your premises. So you can see that there's a difference between the argument and the explanation. And that's exponens. It's doing the explanation for the accepted fact, or the premises, which are accepted facts or evidence or reasons to believe that prove this. So this is the difference between the argument there. And you can read this highlighted section. It's important. Again, I always assume that you've done the reading for this before you even listen to my lecture, so you would have already read this. But just in case you didn't, and you do that, focus on that highlighted part. Okay, so conditional statements. You're always going to see an if-then on the conditional statements. So if, blah, 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 comma, then. If, blah, 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 comma, then. Doesn't even really matter what's after that if or then, just the fact that you see an if then statement, it's a conditional statement. And whatever follows the if is called the antecedent, and whatever follows the then is called the consequent. I'll let you read that section. If professional football games incite violence at home, then the widespread approval given to the sport should be reconsidered. What's the antecedent here? Professional football games incite violence in the home, right? That's the antecedent because it follows the if. What's the consequent? Anything that follows the then. Okay, so you can look at these examples. And then, so for example, if sugary drinks cause heart disease and diabetes, then sugary drinks should be regulated. What's the consequent? Anything that follows the then. What's the antecedent? Anything that follows the if. And the bottom line with this is that conditional statements are not arguments. They're just a conditional statement. If this, then that. They can be turned into an argument, but in order to do that, you have to drop the if then. And Hurley will show you how to take a conditional statement and to turn it into an argument. And I'll let you read that on your own. But just a conditional statement by itself is not an argument. We'll see later in this chapter, you can have multiple conditional statements. This is called the hypothetical syllogism. That is an argument. But you can't have, in order to have an argument, you have to have multiple if-then statements. Just one on itself, not an argument. Okay, so I'll let you read these bullet points 1 through 3. And then we have sufficient and necessary conditions. So this will be important for your homework. The sufficient condition, if you have it, that's all that's needed for the occurrence of something else. Or I would say a sufficient condition, if you want to take notes, it's an instance of something. And a necessary condition for A, whenever A cannot occur without the occurrence of B. So that just means necessary conditions mean they are needed for something. So seems a slightly wordy there, but when I give you a couple examples in your homework, I think it'll stand out. So once again, sufficient condition, something counts as an instance of, and it guarantees that something else will happen. Necessary condition, you have to have it. It's needed. So you can look at his examples. But let's go down here. Let's go straight to the necessary and sufficient, just because I started with those first. Right here. So in section 6, being a tiger is a blank condition for being an animal. Is it necessary? Is it needed for being an animal? Or is it sufficient? It counts as an instance of. Or if I have a tiger, then I'm guaranteed to have an animal. Which one is that? Is that necessary or sufficient? Sufficient, right? Being a tiger is a sufficient condition for being an animal. It counts as an instance of being an animal, or if I have a tiger, then I'm guaranteed that I have an animal. Can I have something else that could be an animal? Another sufficient condition? Yeah, a giraffe, a cat, a dog. Usually when you have a sufficient condition, it means you have multiple sufficient conditions that could act as an instance for being an animal, or it, well, I'll show you when we go down. So what about this one? Having a racket is a blank condition for playing tennis. Is it necessary or sufficient? Can I have something else and still play tennis? Or do I need this to play tennis? I need it, right? It's a necessary condition. What about this one? 7. Burning leaves is a blank condition for producing smoke. Is that sufficient or necessary? Could I have, in other words, can I have other instances of burning something to produce smoke? Sure, I can burn wood, I can burn cloth, I can do a bunch of things. So this is sufficient. Burning leaves is a sufficient condition. It counts as an instance of producing smoke, but could I have other instances? Yeah, I could I could burn wood, cloth, all kinds of other stuff. Now, it's not necessary that I burn leaves to produce smoke because I can have other things, not just leaves. What about 10? Intending to deceive someone is a blank condition for telling a lie. Is it sufficient or necessary? Does it count as an instance of, or is it needed? This one's necessary. Basically, in order to tell a lie, I have to deceive somebody. So deception is needed, okay? And let me show you an example of how Hurley makes a mistake here. You'll like this one. Number 5. Heating water is a blank condition for brewing coffee. Is it necessary or sufficient? Some of you thought necessary. I have to heat water to make coffee, right? Some of you thought sufficient. What other way can you brew coffee? You don't have to heat water. You can have ice. You can chill water. You can have cold coffee. You can even have cold tea. So I could say heating water is a sufficient condition for brewing coffee because I can have cold water. So that's a mistake on Hurley's part. A lot of the Europeans like to drink cold coffee, so iced coffee. But again, those are necessary and sufficient conditions on the homework. Now, if we scroll up, just for me to give you a couple types of non-arguments that you'll see in your homework, whether you're using MindTap or the book, it makes no difference. So on these, you got to determine, is it an argument or is it a non-argument? If it's a non-argument, you got to tell me what form. Is it a warning, piece of advice, blah, blah, blah. So let's do 1. The turkey vulture is called by that name because its red featherless head resembles the head of a wild turkey. Does that seem like an argument to you? Well, we know it's not explicit because it has no trigger words, right? We don't think it's implicit because there's no real premise or evidence supporting some conclusion. This one is an explanation. Okay, go back up and review what an explanation was. 4, a mammal is a vertebrate animal that nurses its offspring. Thus, cats and dogs are mammals, as are sheep, monkeys, rabbits, and bears. So we have the word thus. Remember, that's a premise or conclusion indicating word. Conclusion indicating, right? So is it an argument or is it another type of non-argument? Think about this one. Do you remember the section that talked about illustration? You have some sort of topic and you give an illustration or example of it. That's what's going on. And so thus is a conclusion indicating word, which means it's an argument or it's an illustration. You can go back and review that section. Let's do this last example. If stem cell research is restricted, then future cures will not materialize. If future cures do not materialize, then people will die prematurely. Therefore, if stem cell research is restricted, then people will die prematurely. This one's kind of tricky. It's a conclusion. We'll find out more specifically about this form later on in chapter 1. It's called a hypothetical syllogism. Notice it's not one conditional statement, but it's multiple conditional statements, and those adding up form an argument, okay? So let me do one more. Let's do 10. This will be our last one. 5 college students who were accused of sneaking into the Cincinnati Zoo and trying to ride the camels pleaded no contest to criminal trespass yesterday. The students scaled the fence to get into the zoo and then climbed another fence to get into the camel pit before security officials caught them, zoo officials said. Now, if you read this and you're, thinking like, what is this? Look at the source. It says newspaper clipping. Remember what I said earlier? If it seems like a world report or a newspaper clipping, what is it? It's a report, right? And a report is a non-argument. It's just giving you a bunch of information about some event, or something that happened, okay? So again, for your homework, you're just trying to, let's do this last one, 13. Any unit of length, when cubed, becomes a unit of volume. Thus, the cubic meter, cubic centimeter, and cubic millimeter are all units of volume. It's got that word thus. It's either a conclusion indicating word or, that's right, illustration. So we've had 2 examples so far where I've given you an illustration that's both non-arguments. And that's just giving, it's unpacking units of length. So that's pretty much it. I know it's a lot. You can listen to this video a couple times or in sections, but your goal, you're going to come to a series of passages and you're going to tell me, is this a non-argument or an argument? An argument has premises or a premise, which is evidence, matter of fact, or reasons to believe some conclusion. And That will have an inferential chain of reasoning that forces a conclusion on you. A non-argument, it will do nothing like that, and it will come in different forms. And again, we reviewed them: warning, piece of advice, statement of belief, expository passages, on and on. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Thank you for hanging in there, and any questions, just reach out to me.